So greetings, hello, welcome back to the Philosophy Club, of the first one of 2024 in fact. This is our new year. Let's hope humanity can have a new lease of life and not keep making the same mistakes we've been making before, because last year was pretty scary for many people. We've had the war continuing in Ukraine and Russia, and the assaults on Ukraine totally against international law, and then the horrible attacks, firstly by Hamas on Israel on the 7th of October, and then the retribution by Israel has been disproportionate. I think all international relations experts, all international lawyers, legal experts, realise that this is disproportionate and actually amounting to war crimes and genocide, and the South African government is now taking Israel to the International War Crimes Court in The Hague and accusing them of genocide. So this is very interesting. This will be happening next week. The legal arguments will be held. I think I think Israel is guilty. The question is, okay, so the International Court finds them guilty of intention to commit genocide. What are the sanctions? What does it do if Israel says, well, we don't care, we don't accept your court, we don't like the UN, you know. They're going rogue as a power in defiance of international law and defiance of international public opinion. You know, what happens? Well, that's for another session of this Philosophy Club, but at some point, you know, there might have to be an international peacekeeping force go in to protect the people of Gaza, because at the moment Israel's showing no sign of self-restraint, and a normal, you know, international power would restrain itself. Although obviously the crimes of October 7th were horrendous, it doesn't justify in law the reaction. And interestingly, this week, President Carter, former President Carter, has spoken out against all this. He's a wise man, and he was one of the most important peace presidents of the USA. He's also appalled what's going on. And other senior statesmen in the States are speaking out about this. So, you know, watch this space. I think ultimately what is the power that America has is simply to cut off Israel's huge aid that it gets from the US. The US gives Israel $3-point-something billion every year for weapons and other things. And there's no reason it should go on doing that in perpetuity if Israel is going to flout international law and use it to commit war crimes and genocide. I mean, that's ridiculous. So that, I think, would be a responsible response, and I suspect that the mass killings and so on would cease. You know, so that's the first thing I want to say, is that I've been continuing to monitor this situation with interest and concern. Now that doesn't mean that in itself doesn't solve anything. My perspective on this is much more long-term, deep healing kind of perspective. We shouldn't be in this place. We shouldn't have got here. This catastrophe is caused by an unintelligent, extremist, right-wing Israeli government, fueled by fanatic religiosity, which is trying to rewrite the theological history of mankind and pretend that Judaism hasn't moved on since the days of the Jewish war against the Romans. If you read Josephus, the Jewish war against the Romans was a horrible, bloodthirsty thing. And the Jews were unbelievably bloodthirsty and violent in their actions. And not only against the Romans, but also against each other. When Jerusalem was besieged by the Romans, the Jews split into 3 factions, and they were all killing each other. I've been thinking about this. You know, what is it? Why is there this ferocity there? Is it, if you look at it metaphysically, is it because they've got this idea of there's only one God and it's our God? that's a hell of a burden for people to carry if they actually believe that, the only God in the universe that created the entire universe has only ever spoken to the Jewish people, and they have a sort of divine mandate to do whatever they want and to capture whatever land is promised in their holy books, irrespective of who's on the land. Then that is, I think that's a kind of a form of mental illness. It's a sort of patient. If you look at the whole world as a hospital, which some people say it is, it's a place for wounded souls. On this particular ward, there's a kind of mental illness that says it's the only one that counts. Well, Judaism has moved on a very long way since then. Those are the ideas 2,000 years ago. For a start, Jesus happened, and he was teaching a very, very different kind of Judaism. He was being faithful to the best bits of Jewish tradition, but trying to update it in the path of loving kindness, which I talked about last week. And there are many of the greatest Jewish thinkers that I've met or corresponded with or studied recognise that Jesus' teachings were valid. I mean, he was a rabbi, and what he said was not just for the Christian people, it was also for the Jewish people. And therefore compassion and love are part of that lineage and heritage. And many of the greatest rabbis have known that. And then we've had the Islamic teachings of Muhammad, who again updated the covenant, because this is about a covenant between man and God. And Muhammad updated the covenant again and said, well, it's inclusive of everybody. I mean, the 5 principles that Islam believes in, actually, are very simple and straightforward. If you believe in these 5 principles, you count as a Muslim, which means a surrendered ego. You've given up your ego. And these 5 principles are simply, you believe in prayer, well, and you practice it, so that any kind of meditation or prayer would count according to your customs. You believe in charity, generosity to the less fortunate. Well, that's standard. We should all do that. You believe in fasting, which is something that we should all practice. I fast once a week, just as a symbolic fast in a Gandhian tradition against war, violence, and it started against Brexit, which is the cause of a lot of the problems going on the planet. It was when the extreme right wing in Britain created this smokescreen called Brexit, which was counter to our internationalism and our peace witness as a country, working with the EU to make peace around the planet. We stopped doing that. We suddenly said, no, we're the best nation. We're going to do it our way. We're going to, and that was, so that was where my fasting began, but I've been doing it ever since, once a week. And that again is part of Islam. It was part of Gandhi's work. And it's in all religions to fast. And what it means is that you renounce your attachment to the physical material world. It's not, we love being in a body and having a physical life and eating and all that, but it's good to sometimes abstain from that and reflect on our spiritual nature. So that's the other thing Islam asks of us. And then it asks also a belief in the unity behind existence. So behind all the multiplicity of reality, there is a divine unity hidden away somewhere behind it all. We can't see it. I call it the divine intelligence. In Arabic, it's called Allah. And, it doesn't matter what you call it. The point is, if you actually live according to that innermost wisdom, then that, determines your life, your ethics, your choice, your loves, and so on. And those are the principles that make for being a surrendered soul. Now, I don't see what's wrong with that. I don't see why the Jewish people, the Christians, the Buddhists, the Hindus couldn't say to their Muslim brothers and sisters, hey, I didn't know it was that. Let's be friends. Let's make up. Because the same idea is there in Hinduism, for instance. Instead of weaponizing anti-Islam as a thing to keep you in power if you're a right-wing Hindu, basing your power on fanatical anti-Islam, these people don't even know what Islam means. So And in fact, the definition of being an Orthodox Hindu, the word is astika, as opposed to nastika, which are heretic kind of Hindu. An astika is someone that believes in existence, that affirms existence, that affirms the being of ultimately the one behind everything, which is exactly the same as the affirmation in Islam about innermost unity of things. And it's there in Plato, it's there in the Greek philosophical tradition that I come from, in the European philosophical tradition. That's what we believe. We affirm that being is one. That's what Aristotle defined metaphysics as. It's the study of being. So why don't we just study metaphysics, find that divine unity across all religions, which are like just the wrappings, the Christmas present wrapping, that culture and time and circumstance has given to humanity. And let's affirm the divine beingness of things within the wrappers is unity. And that to me is my recipe for a path to peace. But unfortunately, the right-wing forces on the planet, which are very nationalistic and egocentric, they don't want humanity to realise that. They want to keep weaponising our relations, in emphasising racism and particularism and the uniqueness of every little tribe. Well, as a Druid, we had the remit to travel between all the tribes and prevent war and conflict. That's why we were sworn to non-violence and still are, as Druid elders. So, anyway, that's the kind of my opening remarks about today and the work that's going on. It's the 7th of January today, Sunday. Yesterday, I just want to say another little note. Yesterday was the day of the Magi. We honour the festival of Epiphany, which means the manifestation in Greek. And Epiphany is the time of when the three Magi came to see the baby Jesus and his parents, Mary and Joseph. And it's a very sacred festival. It represents that temporal power. The Magi were kings coming to see the little baby who's going to be bringing in a new energy to humanity, which is the energy of love and compassion. It represents that. Interestingly, in the Gaelic Bible, the Magi are called three Druids, because the word Druid in Irish and Welsh and Scottish is simply a Magi, magus, a magician, an esoteric light worker, whatever you want to use. So three Druids, it says in the Gaelic Bible, come to see baby Jesus, bringing gifts of frankincense, myrrh and gold, which have, symbolic quality, but they're about beauty and giving the fruits of the earth to the spirit world, to the spiritual elders of the planet. So we celebrate that, and yesterday I was on a call with the World Peace Gardens Network with someone from Bethlehem, in fact, professor at the University of Bethlehem, who's teaching economics there, a friend who's British Palestinian. And that was quite a neat synchronicity. We were talking about the Magi coming to Bethlehem, and here I was talking to a chap in Bethlehem, and I was asking if they have any peace gardens. He was talking about the tragedies in the West Bank. I've been to Bethlehem several times. I love it. It's a great city. I feel deeply for my Palestinian friends and my Israeli friends, because I have friends on all sides of this, which is why I set up the World Conference, I set up the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for the Middle East. And we have to make sure that this conflict that's broken out between Israel and Palestinians is put to bed this year. This has got to be the last time it ever happens. And we have to see two states living in harmony side by side. That's going to require a huge shift by the Israeli right wing. They're going to have to unthink their thoughts, because they've been thinking horrible thoughts. And obviously the actions of Hamas, they have to unthink their thoughts too. Neither of those extremist forces want the other lot to exist. Well, that's why they're both heretical. They're not allowing the beingness of each other to flourish. And so, my remarks are redemptive, aimed at allowing philosophical wisdom to permeate into these rival thought systems, which are both heretical, in my opinion, extremist. And as a good Aristotelian, I believe in the metaphysics of being and finding common purpose between them all. Okay, let's thank you very much. That's my opening remarks today. What we're going to do today is we're going to consult the 3 tools that we bring to the Philosophy Club, like we did last week. And we're going to look first at the Tarot of the Gods, because it's always good to ask the gods what they think of these things. And since we've got all the gods here, these are the male masculine gods. This is not because I don't love the goddess. Of course, I'm a goddess person, but we have so many people who have already written the tarots of goddesses, and I thought I'd balance that with Tarot of the Gods. So we'll consult first a card from each of us and see which ones we get. Okay. Any comments on my opening remarks so far? Okay, well, if you think of things, you can always say. So shuffle them up and choose one, and don't show me yet. Keep it secret. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, right. Thank you so much. Right, let's have a look. What have you got, Arbel? Ho ho ho! Ho ho ho! That's a good one. Hercules.
Wonderful.
One of the major arcana. Hercules is a really interesting god. He was very popular in the Greek culture where he comes from, and adopted by the Romans as well. And he stands for strength and courage in the tarot. He's the major arcana card known as strength. And in the conventional tarot, it's a woman holding a lion under her beck and call, representing strength. But Hercules is the strongest of all the gods. That's why he was chosen for this card. He has a very close relationship with the Celtic world as well, which I discovered doing research for the card. In Greek and Roman mythology, Celtus, the ancestor of the Celtic people, that's the Gauls, the British, Irish, Welsh and Scots, was actually Celtus, was a son of Hercules, in fact. And so the Celts were regarded as from Hercules' domain. That's interesting. He was a primordial figure, and he also travelled all over Europe. And when I first moved to France, I was reading a brilliant book by a Druid in Scotland about the ancient tracks of Europe. And Hercules was very present in the Celtic world. He was honoured. And he also had a love affair with Pythene, a beautiful woman down in the mountains. He couldn't stay with her and he had to move on, as often happens with heroes. And she mourned for him and then died. And he then lamented the fact and went back to find her, but she was dead. And he buried her in the Pyrenees Mountains. And the name, the Pyrenees Mountains, comes from Hercules' lover. And that's, a fact of mythology. So Hercules is sacred. The other thing is that Monaco, in the south of Gaul, is named after Hercules Monachos. It's a little principality next to France on the south coast, the Côte d'Azur. And there's a temple to Hercules in Monaco. Originally it was called Hercules Monachos, the one and only Hercules. And he was also important in Phoenician culture, going even further back, because he was honoured by the Phoenician religion He was called Melkart, Melqart, and he was the god of the city-states of Phoenicia, called Tyre, and he was a major deity in the Phoenician and Punic pantheons. He was called the Lord of Tyre. Now, Tyre is where they sent out trading expeditions across the entire Mediterranean, and even as far as Britain, Phoenician sailors, and also around Africa. The Phoenicians were very similar to the Hebrew people. They were older, though, and they invented the alphabet, which was there before the Hebrew tribes adopted it and wrote down their Bible. Byblos was a Phoenician city, and it's it was sacred to the ancient Phoenician pantheon, which included Melkart. So if you think about it, Hercules was a Phoenician and a Greek deity. Scholars are still arguing, did Melkart come first, and what did he give Hercules to the Greek culture as a concept? Probably is the answer. The other thing to say is that it was also from Tyre that Europa came. She was the princess, the daughter of the king of Tyre, and Europa was a Phoenician princess. So the whole continent of Europe is actually Phoenician, culturally speaking, which is now in the Lebanon. And I find Lebanese people incredibly wonderful and sophisticated. I'm very sad that, I would like a peace treaty between Lebanon, Israel, Palestine, Jordan, Syria, all these states. They need to be brought to their senses and stop fighting each other, honour and recognise each other. How's that going to happen? Well, it would be nice if the Israeli people could honour the fact that their deity is only one of the deities of the tarot of the gods. Yahweh is a very important deity, I love him, but he's only one. Other cultures saw God in different ways. And Hercules is also an important deity who has his own, dignity. The father of philosophy, Pythagoras, was half Phoenician, we should not forget. And he spent time studying in the temples of Tyre, as well as Egypt and elsewhere, gathering the information and wisdom he could. So to me, philosophy is the answer here to heal the warring factions between these different split-off nations that each think their God is the only one. This is like saying our mountain is the best, we'll all worship this mountain. It's the best of all the mountains. Well, no, hang on, every place on earth has got mountains. I've been up to Cadair Idris in Wales. That's a mountain, and Snowdonia and all the rest of it. So, anyway, Robert Graves talks a lot about Hercules in his book, The White Goddess. And there's a whole chapter 8 called Hercules on the Lotus, which is typical Robert Graves, who was a great Celtic scholar and Druid savant, as was his father before him, who writes about the symbolism of Hercules across Jewish, Christian, Phoenician, and ancient Celtic cultures. So, look into Hercules and you find many, many mysteries. The other most incredible thing about Hercules, why I love him so much, is he set Prometheus free. Poor Prometheus was suffering on a rock in the Caucasus Mountains because he'd given fire to mankind. Okay, so we have fire, and that means we can have light. So symbolically, he gave fire, electricity, energy. We were living huddled in caves and all going to bed at dusk before Prometheus gave us fire. But it also symbolises the inner fire. If you read Alice Bailey's treatise from Trial Cool, the treatise on cosmic fire, which I have here, it's the inner fire that Prometheus gave us. And also, as I discovered when I was in Athens writing finishing touches of my novel, it turns out there's a legend, a myth, that Prometheus and Athena had a love affair, a wisdom affair. Athena, the goddess of wisdom. Prometheus, the titan, from an older generation of gods than even Zeus, and who could see the future. Prometheus means he was like a druid seer who could tell the future, prophetic among gods. And they had a love affair, and they created mankind. According to the ancient wisdom of the Greeks, Prometheus is the creator of mankind, He created us from clay. And Athena breathed the spirit of life into us. Now that's a very, very ancient Bronze Age mythical story. Now you see the same story in the Bible. God creates mankind from clay, Adam, which means of the earth, and then breathes the Spirit into us, the Holy Spirit. Well, it comes from the same cluster of mythological memes, if you want. And I reckon it comes from the same people, ultimately. Because as I said last week, I think the Indo-European and Semitic people were ultimately one originating people. And so, before Babel scattered the tongues. So, and the Greeks honoured Prometheus, therefore, as the creator of man. Zeus was a later comer who was trying to bring in a sort of authoritarian rule. Look at me, I'm top Zeus. I do everything I say. And that's why Prometheus got into trouble with him. And that's why Zeus tied him up on a mountain, and an eagle came and pecked his liver each day, and then it grew back overnight, and he had the torture all again. And he suffered this for thousands of years. There's another possibility, which is I don't think Zeus was too fond of him having an affair with his daughter, Athena. That's the other reason he stuck him on the mountain. Typical. But anyway, the good news is, when Hercules was passing through there one time, because he was always roaming about doing good like Lancelot with his huge club and everything, which he's got here over his shoulder, right? He heard poor old Prometheus crying out in agony, and he went and rescued him from the Caucasus Mountains. So, I mean, that's pretty good. That was just like a little one thing he did, right? So, in a sense, that is a symbol, Prometheus, of mankind being self-torturing. That's what we're doing again and again, and we keep doing it day after day. Well, Hercules can set us free from that. So I think for all these reasons we should honour him. And the people of northern Italy were strongly Celtic, and so he was also honoured in Milan and all the other cities like Bologna that were originally Celtic foundations. People forget that. This was when Rome was just a few mud huts. So let's honour that wisdom, I think. Okay, what's the second card we've got? Gosh, right. Well, this is interesting. We've got Baal, who is the five of earth, and is another Phoenician god. So, there seems to be a common theme running through here. The five of earth, Baal, in the Bible, according to the Jewish telling of history, is very much a baddie. Baal is the god that you don't want to worship if you want to stay in with Yahweh. And in fact, if you're a prophet of Baal, you really are in for trouble. You're going to get smited with fire. However, this is based on a misunderstanding. The trouble is there were no real scholars around when these ancient texts are being written. But Baal simply means the Lord or Master. And as I was taught by my friend who came to stay with me a couple of years ago, from part Lebanese descent, who speaks fluent Arabic, she said that in modern day Lebanon, you call a friend who you really respect, you say Baal, my Lord, my Master. And women will often refer humorously and affectionately to their husband as my Bali, meaning my Lord or Master. It's a term of affection for someone that you really respect and who is quite powerful, who is like a lord figure. And so it became a generic term in Phoenician for the Baal was like the Lord of the mountain, or the Lord of the sea, or the Lord of the animals. And so these Phoenician deities were all generically called the Baal. But its etymology is simply it's the Lord or Master. So who were these Phoenician people? Well, they were very amazing, and they invented the alphabet. In Ugarit, they created the Ugaritic alphabet around 1400 BC, with 30 letters that corresponded to 30 different sounds. The previous writing systems hadn't got this idea that the shape of a letter could correspond with a sound. That was the breakthrough the Phoenicians did. How did they think that? Well, they were very masterly and they were tuned in to the mysteries, I think, is how I would explain it. I've been to an amazing site on the coast there called Dor, which is in Israel, but it used to be Phoenician. And the sea is blue, the sunsets are amazing over the western horizon. The air is warm. It's like paradise on earth, the Phoenician coastline. And I think they were just in love with life, these people. And they wrote down their sacred literature in Ugaritic. We have the legend of Danel, and we have mythological struggles between Yam and Mot. And some of these then get into the Hebrew Bible, because the Hebrew people adopted culturally from the Phoenicians. The Hebrews were less developed, less evolved as a civilization when the Phoenicians were already a great power. And this is shown in the Bible that when King Solomon, who married some Phoenician women and greatly loved Phoenician culture, he wasn't a fool, Solomon, he was the wisest king, he asked for architects to come from Phoenicia to build his temple in Jerusalem. He wasn't arrogant, he said, "Oh, I'm only having Israeli architects building this." No, he knew the Phoenicians were the great architects of the area, so they came and built the great temple of Yahweh. And Solomon was wise enough to know that Yahweh is just one way of talking about beingness. He honoured his wife and wives to honour their gods in their own way. So his Phoenician wives could go on worshipping Baal, it's not a problem. Because it's just another way of talking about the absolute. And, you know, that the absolute cannot be spoken, which is why when you went into the Holy of Holies in the temple in Jerusalem, you were silent. And you cannot speak the name of God in Orthodox Judaism, because that which can be spoken is not the absolute name, which is what the Taoist scriptures say. So, anyway, read the Paradise Papers, The Suppression of Women's Rights by Merlin Stone. It's a very important feminist spiritual text, published in London in 1976. When I read that in the early 80s, it's about how the goddess got written out of history. And unfortunately, you know, that happened because there was a silencing of women's spirituality going on at that time. And I think the suppression of Phoenician culture was part of that. This history is not generally known, and instead we got, you know, biblical stories which only tell half the story. And the Christian attempt, I think Christianity was an attempt to rewrite and say there's a story older than the Bible. And so when Jesus said, people challenged him and said, "Why, by what right are you teaching? Under whose authority? You know, you seem to be saying things that don't coincide with our Jewish faith, and we follow Abraham." He said, "Before Abraham was, I am." Meaning, I'm speaking from a much more ancient place, even than Abraham. I'm coming from an existential place of love. Now, it's interesting that Jesus came from Galilee, and he had disciples in Phoenicia. Several times in the Gospels, Jesus goes up to Tyre, and he has meetings with Phoenician disciples of his. We don't have their stories. We don't know. You know, they're just little glimpses in the Gospels. But I believe it's definite, because in the Phoenician tradition, they have this idea of the kind of the